Dr. Diehl likes it so much and say that we all have gelled, we all have gelled together, and then so it's nice to meet new friends, and then it's nice to see some old friends, and today finally Dr. Solomon is here, huh? Yeah. Yeah. Well, I have quite a few announcements. Let me just get over all this announcement first, and first, there will be some book sale for sale over there, and Phyllis is taking care of that. Yeah, all right. And then by the way, one of our friends, if you remember Vernita, she had kidney transplant and it was successful. She had kidney transplant. Yes, on Valentine's, and now she's home. Yeah, well, she's still in pain, but the kidney is working well. The mere fact that she was sent home, so it means that she's doing very well. And today, I have some 3x5 cards. This is for next week for our medical panel. And then so today, I'm going to distribute this, and those of you, who want to have these cards, who have some questions, you can write all your questions today and give them to me so I can distribute to the panelists. And it's going to be very interesting discussion. And remember, it's going to be next Saturday, and next Saturday at 3 o'clock, and it's going to be at the Elias Community Center. And one of the things we try to have is that we're going to have a market tour, and our friend Mary Reynolds is going to be, she's going to be one of our coaches, and she said she has time on Monday or Tuesday, on Monday and Tuesday, so it means it's tomorrow. Yeah, it's tomorrow, exactly, either at 10 or 11 o'clock. And since this is so private and so personal, and then so she asked me to give you the number, saying, can you please write down her number, her telephone number. This is her cell phone. It's 909 645 7114. Her name is Mary Reynolds, and she will have a tour, at a market tour at Loma Market. So it all depends on when you call her, then you just say which one do you prefer, either Monday or Tuesday, either 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock, and you're going to meet her there at the at Loma Market. Yes. Okay, it's 909 645 7114. And this is a very good, the market tour is very good, and she will identify all the good what do you call, good products, and all the pairing of the food. And then this a while ago, Tony was asking me and looking at the ingredients at the back, and see about the calories and about all the sodium content, the sugar, the fibers, and everything. So you learn that, and so learn it well, and that's another lifelong learning, right? So you just learn, and then of course has to be palatable too. But as a rule, for the processed food is always not very good, because in order for the processed food to taste good, you have to have high fat and high salt. And because of that, sometimes the calories will be high too. So as much as possible, we for lifestyle medicine, we discourage processed food, except for tofu. Is tofu processed food? Yes, processed food. Actually, we prefer that if you can eat the edamame, the soybean, probably that would be better than the tofu. But tofu is minimally processed, so it is acceptable. And again, tofu is so tasteless that in order to taste good, you have to really just work on it, to make it palatable. So you can see it's like that. Mary Reynolds, Meri Reynolds. And this is her cell phone number. So she said you can either call her or text her. Exactly. Text her. And then see which one that you prefer, either Monday or Tuesday, either 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock. This is kind of a nice feature to have. We did not have that in the original lineup, but since was able to. Yeah, she's the RN, and she was in CHIP program with Dr. Diehl and his group for 15 years, right? And then right now she's doing the heart nursing. All right, Dr. Diehl wants you to really look at read your syllabus. Okay, if you have nothing to do at home, read your syllabus, and then just go over that, like I said, because we try to, and especially learn about the recipes, and then what food to eat, and then about the fibers, about all the good things. Okay, all right, and I'm going to go over again. We only have a few sessions left. Today, by the way, is a very, very important session, because this is understanding and reversing type 2 diabetes. And type 2 diabetes, if you know, that is usually is a quiet problem. It's not a disease, but it's a syndrome. So a quiet problem. And so, but this is something that we all can control, so we can have full control of our body system and beat the disease, so we don't have all the complications. For diabetes, the most there are a lot of dreaded complications, because it affects the blood vessels. So even from the brain, you can get higher incidence of stroke, higher incidence of heart problems, higher incidence of peripheral vascular disease, higher incidence of deafness, losing your hearing, losing your eyesight, and so there are a lot of problems, and even skin problems also. And then of course with the high blood sugar and those kind of. So learn all the things today well. By the way, I'm going to take this chance to remind you again. We have the capability of YouTube, and YouTube, you just do U-turn wellness, from U-turn wellness, and then Edwin here. We appreciate Edwin to put our lectures in the thing. And then so if you miss anything, you can look at the YouTube. There might be a time lag, maybe like 24 hours or 48 hours, but you can see that. All right. Yeah. And at the same time, I want to introduce Bobby also. Bobby is our everything man, and we depend on everything man, and then we depend on him on a lot of things. And there's another one, Bonar. What is Bonar? Bonar is our sound engineer. Sound engineer. In fact, he owns this, the sound system, so it's very handy to have him. So maybe we have a clap, and then they said all these three people have been very very busy, and then we won't be able to do all that. And then don't forget arranging the chairs. We have some ladies to help us all this, and we really appreciate it. All right, so today, and then on Saturday we have the medical panel. So if you want to ask questions, fill up your 3x5 card. And then on Saturday we're going to remind you again. On Sunday we're going to do the blood test. So we're going to remind you to be fasting. And after that, then we'll give some more announcement, because sometimes when we give the announcement so early, and then we kind of tend to forget. So yes. Fasting on our test on the 24th of February 25th at night, like the Saturday Saturday night, yeah, starting midnight until you get the blood test. And then, but this time we're going to have another system, because we're going to give those people who have diabetes, who have been diagnosed diabetes, to come early, because last time, if you remember, everybody was rushing. We did not expect you guys were so eager. Then the line was just, so this time we're going to give tickets, the little tickets. So with the yellow tickets for those people who have who have been diagnosed diabetes, to come here first, and then so we stagger them, maybe stagger like 4 groups, in the 4 groups again. We'll tell you about the detail later. All right, and I think all the announcements, I have covered all the announcements. Okay, now it is a pleasure for me to have Pastor Mike to give us the devotional.
How is everybody? I was so grateful to Dr. Diehl for talking about forgiveness yesterday. And I want to sort of build on that just a little bit. I'm not going to talk about forgiveness. I want to talk about not judging. Now, Jesus famously said, "Judge not, or you will be judged. With the measure you judge, so you will be judged." That principle, as you might imagine, sounds easy, but it has been historically very hard for even followers of Jesus to live up to. I don't know if you encounter this in relationship to food or not, but I know I have. I can remember gathering in a restaurant with my family, and by my family I'm talking about my 3 children and their spouses and their children, and suddenly a good-natured argument broke out as to which was the best diet. And we had everything from the paleo diet to vegan to everything represented at the table. It was all in good fun, of course, but underneath all of that is oftentimes a sense of perhaps superiority that can lead to a judgmental attitude. Now, Paul, the Apostle Paul, ran into that same problem in his churches, both in Rome and in Corinth, except the problem he had was not people judging the diet according to whether it was healthy or not. The problem he ran into was a little different. He ran into the problem of where the source of the food was. You see, if it was sold by people who worshipped idols and who had offered the food to idols and blessed it that way, then there were some people who believed, and I think this is understandable if you understand the culture of the time, who thought that somehow the pagan idols had tainted the food, had made it unclean or unfit to eat. That's not a health distinction. That's a distinction of ritual cleanliness. And so many of the early Christians in Corinth and in Rome were kind of confused about, well, every once in a while they'd have a big festival, big community festival and everything, and they'd have food that was readily available. And many of the poorer classes depended on these, gifts of food from the government to survive and thrive. But other people, especially those with a more strict Jewish background, would look very judgmentally on their brothers and sisters who were buying this from the market that was known to be associated with a pagan god or something like that. And so it became a real problem. And I must stress that the problem was not whether or not the food was healthy or not. The problem was whether or not you should judge somebody for what they ate. And Paul is very, very clear in his answer to this. He says, this is in Romans 14:17, "For the kingdom of God is not a matter of eating and drinking, but of righteousness, peace, and joy in the Holy Spirit." And he goes on to say a few verses later, "Do not destroy the work of God for the sake of food. All food is clean." Now remember, that's a ritual cleanliness. All food is clean, but it is wrong for a person to eat anything that causes someone else to stumble. So Paul was more concerned about the relationship between people than he was about following strict rules about where you buy your food. Now what does this have to do with us? Well, I can remember, I know a couple, and they're about my age, who were having some serious health problems. And they got a hold of a program that taught them many of the same principles that we're learning here in this program. And after a couple of weeks of this, they were so on fire for this, they just couldn't stop talking about it. And I mean, you sometimes felt like you were kind of a captive audience if they started talking about diet. I mean, they would tell you what was right and what was wrong and what was, you know, this and that and how great this was that they had learned and everything. And, you know, the rest of us are kind of standing there going, well, okay, that's good that it works for you. And the point I want to make is the same point that Jesus made and the same point that Paul made, and that is, don't use your knowledge to judge other people. Because actually, judgment can undo all the good benefits of whatever program you're learning, whatever diet you've adopted. And let's face it, we live in community with each other. And I can guarantee you, you will be able to find something wrong with every church meal you go to here. Okay? Why do you think pastors have a hard time with their weight? But the point is, you live your life as you know best without judging other people. The kingdom of God is not a matter of food and drink, as Paul said. Let's pray. Loving God, thank you for the many blessings you've given us, the blessings of food and drink and exercise. May we utilize these gifts wisely without being judgmental. I thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Pastor Mike, and Pastor Starla have been giving us all these beautiful devotionals. One of the unique things about this church, Pastor Mike, I think I can say, is the presence of a lot of Indonesian members, right? We have over 200 Indonesian members in our church. I was also born in Indonesia, but I came to United States in 1962, and most of my education is from United States. So you can see I'm sometimes very hard-headed compared to other Indonesian friends. But for this meeting, since I was from Indonesia, so of course I solicited a lot of help from our Indonesian friends here, and then they're here and they're helping us, and then so we really appreciate all your help. All right, now I mentioned earlier about Edwin Kumendong. Yes, Nanette? Okay, so okay, so that's your car. Okay, thanks a lot, Nanette. She's our office administrator. Okay, well, I mentioned earlier about Edwin Kumendong. He's from Indonesia. He's from the island of Sulawesi, and yesterday we were talking about forgiveness, and Dr. Diehl was so touched about his story, how his father was killed. So since this weekend we're talking about forgiveness, about judging other people, and then so even among the family members, we have problems too, especially in Indonesia. So this time, Dr. Diehl said that we are going to ask Edwin to tell us the story of his father, Edwin Kumendong.
When I finished my high school, my father got killed by one of our family, and that family happened to be also a student of my mom. My mom is a 48 years principal in our school. So, and then our life is always on the stage. Since we are like 5 years old, we either pray, sing, or preach or whatever. We always on the stage. When my father got killed, we all shocked. And one more thing, I learned how to disable people. And then something come out in my mind, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna kill somebody. But the law says, like in America, if you plan to kill, you either live in jail or be killed. Dead, right? So I decide, forget about it. I delete my bitterness in my heart. I have a fresh start, and make the long story short, in 2017, I went back to Indonesia, and I just about like 5 more minutes to preach in the church, and I saw the guy, and I said, it's not wise to go up there and preach about forgiveness if I don't shake his hand, even though I already forgave him long time ago. Okay? I go to him and then shake his hand. And he just about to, maybe this guy want to hit me or something. And I said, brother, don't worry about it. I already forgive you long time ago. So, when I get out, just about to go up, he come out crying, and we took a picture together. I sent it to Dr. Diehl for that picture. And then I go and preach up there about forgiveness. What I'm going to say is, if we hold grudges in our heart, it's not going to hurt somebody else. It's going to hurt yourself. So, from that moment, I have no grudges with anything. Somebody said, maybe Auntie Sally said, Edwin, I don't like you. I don't really care. Right? Dr. said, oh, I hate you, Edwin. Who cares? If you hold grudges in your heart, it will kill you. Me, I don't really care. People joking or they're telling the truth. I don't like you, Edwin. You're ugly. How do I care? I don't really care. I know myself. I'm handsome for myself. See, if everybody can follow my step, this is a real life. If you can follow my step, it will be fine. The disease is probably far away. One more thing, bitterness is not going to help you. It's not going to help you at all. Whatever you see, if you hate somebody, forgive yourself first, and God will forgive you. Jesus will forgive you. And also to go to heaven, you have to learn how to forgive. If you guys have any question, because it's a long story, you can ask me later in the back. Thank you. But remember, forgiveness is always number one.
I was stunned last night when Edwin came to me and he said, you talked about Mrs. Hannah and the murder of her daughter, and of how forgiveness helped Mrs. Hannah to escape from her own prison of her own emotions, of hatred and revenge. And he said, Hans, my father was 49 years of age when he was killed by someone. And yet, my family, we could have had feelings of extreme bitterness. 49 years of age, family leaving behind. But somehow we were able to come to the point where we actually were able to extend the hand of forgiveness to the killer. I was stunned when this happened right to one of my friends here. So also I wanted to mention to you, some of you have come to me and you have said, how can I forgive someone who's no longer alive? What do I do? What would you do? This woman is now coming to me and she said, he did this to me, but he's gone. How can I forgive him? What do I do? What would you do? That's the answer, probably. Write the letter. Express your feelings. Let them know, I really don't know your circumstances and what prompted you to do what you did to me. Show some kind of understanding, but then express how deeply you have been hurt all these years. You carried this burden, this feeling abused within your heart, but that you have come to the point now where you're prepared to extend the hand of forgiveness through the letter. And then take the letter, seal it, put a stamp on it, but don't mail it, but burn it in the fire. You've cleansed yourself. It's done. Maybe this might be helpful to some people that are in that situation. Another item. Some people came to me and they said, how do I know how much salt I should eat? What do I do? How many times can I shake it down? I said, well, you don't really do any shaking. You don't really need to shake any salt, because what you want to do, you want to read the labels, because if you have some processed food, if you have some foods on the shelf, when you go to the store and you look at a food that has a nutrition label on it, make sure that the number of sodium milligrams, sodium, is about the same and no higher than the number of calories that are listed for the serving of food. Are you with me there? Did you all follow me there? Make sure that the number of milligrams of sodium, the salt, is about the same as the number of calories that are listed on the nutrition label, and then you have a pretty good idea that you're on the right track. Okay? But you know, you are very, very fortunate. We're all fortunate that Mary is going to take you on the shopping tour, and I hope you folks sign up, because this is a great opportunity for you to begin to zero in on some of these things and to simplify your shopping. You don't have to spend hours. When I shop with my wife, in 15, 20 minutes we're done for the whole week, because we know exactly where we go, what we want, where the foods are, and the same thing can be true for you. And when you do this, your food budget declines by at least 35 to 45%. You're saving money. And you don't have to spend all this time once you know where the foods are. And Mary, who has worked with me for 15 years, should be very, very happy to take you on this tour at the Loma market. And I think you can sign up for the time that is convenient. Be sure you see Shirley for this. Now, today we want to talk about what some people have called the Black Plague. The Black Plague that decimated whole populations in the Middle Ages. This is what some people now refer to when they talk about diabetes. Let's take a look at diabetes. We see a dramatic change in the prevalence of adults having diabetes in this country. Please note the states here that are in this color here, that's about 5% of the population, of the adult population, has diabetes. This is then for 1994. You go to 1997, now it's 6%. You see a new color emerging here. Then 2000, it's now 7% of the population, and a new color is emerging there, which suggests that probably 8 to 9% of the people, adults in that state, have diabetes. And please note, it seems to always happen here. This is where the initial increase is noticed. And then it spreads to the northeast and to the northwest. 3 years later, you have now 8% of the adults have diabetes. 3 years later, you have now 9% of the adults have diabetes. 3 years later, 10% of the adults have diabetes. And today, 15% of the American adults are suffering from diabetes. More than that, let me tell you what's happening. And that is that we now have the statistics in place that makes it very clear to us that every second American adult either has full-blown diabetes or is developing diabetes. They have pre-diabetes on their way to developing diabetes. Here you see the changes have taken place in the last 20 years. A 300% increase in the prevalence of diabetes, adult diabetes in America. In particular, people in the age of 65 plus. There's a dramatic increase that you have seen here since 1985. This is when everything began to change dramatically. Look at the changes here for the age group of 45 to 64. As a matter of fact, we used to talk about type 1 and type 2 diabetes. And type 2 diabetes, we actually used to call this adult onset diabetes. These were people that would develop the diabetes at the age of 55, 65 years of age. Diabetes. We were taught, when I went to school, we were taught if you have a large person and that person is 60 years of age, be sure you check for potential diabetes. Today, we're checking people that are overweight, that are 50 years of age, 40 years of age, 30 years of age, 20 years of age, 15 years of age, and they have adult onset diabetes, which was unthinkable 40 years ago. In those cases, we thought this must have been a juvenile diabetic that was from a different kind of a cause that created the diabetes. So we have seen a dramatic increase, especially in the last 20, 30 years. It has been doubling every 15 years. And the chances of becoming a diabetic in the USA for a newborn baby in a lifetime is 1 out of 3 babies born today will develop diabetes in a lifetime. And we have no cure for this disease. Here you see the statistics. 15% of the adults have diabetes in America, 37 million people. Then you have 96 million American people that have pre-diabetes, which is 40% of all the adults already have the beginnings of pre-diabetes. And if you have pre-diabetes and you're overweight, the chances are 30% of these people in 3 years will be full-blown diabetics. So take it seriously. When we kind of suggest to you, you may be a pre-diabetic. See your physician, get it tested again. Because if you're overweight and you're pre-diabetic, within 3 years, you have a 30% chance that you become a full-blown diabetic. So please take a look. When you add up these 37 million diabetics, and please note that 23% of these diabetics don't even know they have diabetes because nobody told them. Or if they had a blood sugar that was high, somehow it was overlooked and, or the person didn't take it too seriously. Please also note that 47% of the adults over 65 years of age already have diabetes, pre-diabetes. 47%. That's every second adult over 65 already has prediabetes and is developing full-blown diabetes. Please take a look. You have 37 million full-blown diabetics. You have 96 million with prediabetes, which is 133 million people. And I checked out the statistics in America. We have about 250 million adults in the United States. So 133 million out of 250 million adults have already either diabetes or are moving towards diabetes, which means every second American adult has diabetes or is at risk for diabetes. The black plague is hitting us. Serious. Now, how do you know that you might be a diabetic? What are some of the symptoms? How do you know you're diabetic? Joan, what do you think? Oh, a person that is
Very thirsty, drinking a lot.
constantly thirsty, looking for something to drink. Yeah, so, okay, that's one. What else? What other symptoms do we have? What is it? Blurred eyesight. Very, very good. Difficult to focus your eyes. And then you have, if you have a lot of thirst and you also have a lot of hunger, obviously you drink more and obviously you go more to the bathroom. So frequent urination is another aspect here. Feeling tired, tingling in your hands and feet. And then of course for men, one of the first signs that possibly diabetes could be involved is erectile dysfunction or impotence. And again, we oftentimes write that off and say, well, maybe who knows why it is. Well, I tell you, most of these situations where you have erectile dysfunction in a young person that is under 55 years of age could very well be the first sign of diabetes. So diabetes is very, very serious. How do you define diabetes? What are the numbers? What do you look for? Yeah, take a look. What do you see? Well, the two ways that we can define diabetes. You can go to with the traditional way of looking at it. We're looking at blood sugar levels, the glucose levels, and any time that you have more than 125 for your blood sugar, that's considered to be a diabetic, and you should be checked again and again to make sure that this is indeed the case. If you have a blood sugar below 100, you're considered to be a normal, healthy person, and if you're between 100 and 125, you are a pre-diabetic. So you see, it's not that far along from being pre-diabetic to be a full-blown diabetic. And then you can also go to the newer system now, which talks about A1C, and there are different kind of numbers that you see here. So we can define diabetes technically by the number of blood sugar that we have in our system. Now, diabetes is also a very powerful accelerator of atherosclerosis. We've talked about that quite a bit, didn't we? You see here, diabetes, aside from cholesterol, high blood sugar, and smoking, the three big factors, is the very next one on the line. Diabetes accelerates atherosclerosis. And when that happens, the atherosclerosis can affect many different organs. It affects these larger vessels, but it's also some of the smaller vessels, and in the process, atherosclerosis as one of the contributing factors of blindness has become the number one factor of blindness is diabetes. Blindness, the number one cause of blindness is diabetes. We talked about blurred vision, but it can also go all the way to being totally blind. Then look at kidney disease. Diabetics don't die from diabetes. What do they die from? Well, they die from heart disease. They die from strokes. You can see you have a risk that is 2 to 4 times higher, dying from a heart attack or a stroke. But then look at kidney disease. When you have diabetes, the chances of becoming a kidney failing person is about 18 times higher. And 39% of all the diabetics today actually have serious kidney disease where they have to be on kidney dialysis. You go 3-4 times a week for 3-4 hours to have these the blood filtered because your kidneys are no longer working very well, and usually 4, 5, 6 years later it's over. So when you have kidney disease, it doesn't sound too, we have a very guarded prognosis. It's pretty serious. Here's the famous Framingham study that dealt with atherosclerosis. This is a very famous study. They wrote up to 80% of diabetics die from atherosclerosis-related diseases. They must control their... What are the risk factors? What are the risk factors of atherosclerosis? Number one? Come on, folks. Number one risk factor for atherosclerosis is cholesterol. I mean, I just showed it to you here. Didn't you see it there? There, cholesterol is the big one. And then the next one is high blood pressure and smoking, and then you have diabetes. And then, of course, then you have obesity. So we must control the risk factors, okay? Now, I've given you enough bad news about diabetes. It's a black picture, isn't it? But I have some good news for you. This disease can be turned around oftentimes within weeks. The turnaround in bringing the blood sugars down happens within 3 to 4 days. But it's not going to happen if you rely on medications, which are trying to control somehow, but they don't really work that well. And there's a new medication developed every few months. And yet the answers are very, very simple. All you have to do is begin to focus on a diet of foods as grown, foods that are very high in fiber, and foods that are very low in fat, oil, and grease, and foods that are very rich in nutritional density. These are the foods that come out of the hand of a master designer. Are you with me there? You know, somebody talked about, Shirley mentioned tofu. Is tofu coming out of the hand of the master designer? No, but you know, it's pretty close to it. It's a somewhat refined food, but you know, so you want to use it once in a while, and that's very, very fine. But try to eat foods as they come in nature, preferably, particularly when it comes to diabetes. Okay? It's some time ago now, actually it's about 40 some years ago, that a famous professor spoke at Loma University. His name was Dr. James Anderson, a man who was one of the authorities in the area of diabetes. He had written over 500 articles about diabetes. He had written many, many chapters in textbooks of heart disease and diabetes. And he came to Loma Linda, and he had just spent some time at the Pritikin Longevity Center, where he saw for the first time that when you feed people a high-starch diet, you can reverse diabetes. He was shocked. He said to the people at the center there, he said, "You're killing these people. You cannot give people starch. You're diabetics. The starch turns into..." He didn't understand, as a world authority, that starch is not always starch. When you have starch as it is unrefined, it works totally differently from the starch that is refined. When you have unrefined starch, you have fiber with it, and the fiber changes everything. So what we're telling people, if you want to do something about your diabetes, eat more starch. And people are stunned. What? Unrefined starch as it comes in groats. Have you heard that word before? You have barley, you have wheat, you have, you can even have potatoes, especially when you add some beans to the potatoes, because the beans are high in fiber, the potatoes are low, so you combine these two, and you can have your potatoes as a diabetic if you add the fiber that is in beans. So there's something very, very special about a high fiber content starchy food. And so Dr. Anderson, he came, I was at the Predican Center there, I was the director of research, and he said, Hans, I mean, you're killing these people, you cannot do this. And he said, well, I said, we're collecting the data here. Within 3, 4, 5 days, within 30 days, these people leave here, and most of these people are off their insulin, they're off their blood, off their medications. And he said, I can't believe this. And so he said, let me see what you folks are doing here, and I do it in my own way at the University of Kentucky, where I have a professor. I'm going to do the experiments there, and I want to see if this thing is really, really working. He didn't want to believe it. It was such a shock. So he did his experiments at the University of Kentucky, and then he came to Loma Linda in 1980, and he spoke there, and he said, ladies and gentlemen, some 50 to 75% of type 2 diabetics on insulin, and 80 to 90% of those on pills could normalize their blood sugars and be off medications within weeks if they change their diet towards a more normal, unrefined diet, period. A man that was an authority figure made a total turnaround after seeing the results of using very simple foods as grown in managing the blood sugar levels that would come down consistently within days. Now, if you really want to understand how this thing is working, let me perhaps try to talk to you a little bit about the insulin as the key factor. Insulin is sort of like the key that you hold in your hand, that you put into the lock of a locked door, and you turn the key and the door opens up. That's insulin. Insulin is sort of the key that opens up the doors of the cell. You know, we have, when you talk about cell, you know, we have trillions of cells in the body. And insulin goes to every one of these cells. It's going through the bloodstream, and it opens up every one of these little doors on the cell so that the blood sugar, the sugar in the blood, can get into the cell because that's where it's needed. If you don't get if you have a low blood sugar, you have no energy. You need to fill up the tank. The tank are those trillions of cells, and you have to open first to let the glucose, the gasoline, into the tank, into the cell, and then the cell can function. That's what is needed. That's where you get the energy. But there's something wrong with the insulin somehow. Let me just talk to you about that a bit more. This is a normal cell. This is a cell here, and this is surrounded by blood. Every cell is in close proximity to the blood stream. And you notice here, inside the cell are the glucose molecules. This is the gasoline in the tank that drives the engine. And the insulin comes from the pancreas that you see right here. And the pancreas releases the insulin, and the insulin opens up these gates here. You see those gates here? It opens them up, and the glucose that is in the bloodstream can then enter the cell, and everything is working perfectly well. Now, what do you see here? Please note, do you see this person here? Is this person slender or large? Slender, okay. Now what about the next person? Slender, is this person slender or large? This is an overweight person. And please note, the pancreas is working overtime. It's producing lots and lots of insulin. This is not a deficiency of insulin. This is plenty of insulin, but the insulin somehow cannot work. It cannot open the gates. It cannot get the key into the lock because the locks are gummed up with chewing gum. It's called fats. Something like that. So here now you see the blood sugar is building up on the outside of the cell, and the glucose is increasing. And now you have diabetes because you have an abundance of glucose in the bloodstream, but not in the cell where it's needed. You have some, but not enough. So here now you have these gummed up locks where the insulin cannot do its work very well. And the body tries to overcome and compensate. And the pancreas produces insulin to open up these gates, and it cannot do it. And after about 10, 15 years, the pancreas is exhausted and says, I give up. And the person now is no longer able to produce any insulin and becomes now what we call a type 1 diabetic. So you have to be now dependent on insulin being injected on a regular basis. I beg your pardon? The type 2 becomes a type 1 now. Okay, it becomes totally dependent on having insulin injected from the outside. Here you see it again. We talked about the pancreas becoming fatigued, becomes inactive, and the person becomes now a type 1 diabetic, where insulin has to be injected from the outside. So how many people, what's the percentage of type 1 versus type 2 diabetes? Is type 1 fairly rare? Is it? Type 1 is fairly rare. Only about 5% of the people that have diabetes have type 1 diabetes, where you are actually, oftentimes as a baby already, develop the diabetes, which is totally dependent on injections of insulin. Most diabetics are type 2 diabetics, like 90+% of all the diabetics are type 2 diabetes. That's related directly to obesity and the diet that has become the hallmark of the American lifestyle. And so how do we treat these diabetics? Well, here's from 2020. About 4 million people are on insulin, which is 14% of all the diabetics. These are type 2 diabetics. Then about 17 million or 62% of the people are on pills. And then many of these people are on both insulin and pills. And then you still have some people here that are on a diet that doesn't work, because what we usually do, it's tragic. What we do, we put these people on a high protein diet, because we have learned that we don't want to give them carbohydrates. They're starches, right? And starches are turned into sugar. So we haven't figured out that there's a different kind of a starch that's unrefined. So we said, well, they cannot have carbohydrates, and maybe they shouldn't eat too much fat either, because it makes them overweight. So what else can you eat? There's only one left, that's protein. So these people are on high protein diets, and the high protein diet is directly associated with kidney disease. People that have kidney disease usually they have difficulties, they have had their kidneys overworked with these high animal protein diets. And that's the American diet. So it should be a surprise to you that we have an epidemic growing in this country that is centered also around kidney disease. You have these dialysis centers emerging everywhere now, because people are developing kidney disease, because it also is directly related to the increase in diabetes. So what about these drugs? Well, you have many of these different drugs. They don't cure, they don't stop the epidemic, they may be harmful. Have you ever heard that there is a drug that can cure diabetes? Ever heard of a drug that can cure diabetes? Diabetes is called a chronic disease. That means once you have it, you'll always have it. That means a cure is very rare, virtually impossible, medically speaking. And yet, you can turn this disease off within days if you're prepared to break your love affair with the American diet. Being seduced taste, hitting the pleasure center of the brain. And you want more and more and more. And people think, well, why don't they push away? Why don't they just have one Pringle? Folks, you can't do that. There's something happening in the mind that is releasing some special hormones which wants you to have more and more and more. So then you have many of these, you have seen sulfonylureas, Resolin, Avandia. Avandia is now banned in Europe. Resolin is gone. These drugs, they come and they go. They're promoted with a big fanfare. This is the answer for diabetes. And about 6 months later or 2 years later, you have excessive number of deaths. You have excessive number of this and this and that. And then the drug disappears. It's gone. And a new one comes up. Folks, the answer is not going to be found so much in medication as it is found in making some simple lifestyle adjustments. How you eat is a big issue. How you exercise is a big issue. Well, we have talked about that, haven't we? And that's what we do in diabetes. We just take care of the symptoms. We may try to control the blood sugar somewhat, but we don't really find a cure there. And so what I want you to focus on today is the change that has taken place in our diet. Okay? We have already talked about this several times. We have gone from whole foods to refined foods. We've gone from plant foods to animal products. We've gone from low calories to high calories. We've gone from high fiber, we used to low fiber. We used to eat groats, we used to eat brown rice, now it's white rice. We removed the fiber. And then we've gone from whole food or whole carbs to refined carbs. Whole carbohydrates, whole starchy foods to refined starchy food. These are the 5 changes that have set the foundation for the epidemic of diabetes. We're talking about the causes and the cures. Let's talk about this a little bit more. We have known, when you look at the populations around the world, it's very difficult to find diabetes in populations where countries are too poor to turn potatoes into potato chips. They're too poor to turn brown rice into white rice. They eat very simple foods, they're high in fiber, and diabetes is very rare in these countries. But as the countries begin to change and adopt their American dietary concepts more and more, the diabetes becomes prominent in the societies. Example, Japan. Before 1960, only 1% of the adults over 40 years of age had diabetes. How many? 1%. Today it's over 16% of the Japanese adults have diabetes. What happened? What happened? Let's take a look. What happened? Look what happened. You see here carbohydrates. They used to eat lots of carbohydrates, brown rice, but it came down dramatically. They used to have about 380 grams of carbs, starchy foods. Now it's down to 280, and it's less than that. And the fat content, it used to be a very low-fat diet, 20 grams of fat a day here in 1960, and now in 2020, about 60 grams. So the fat consumption has tripled in Japan. The complex carbohydrates, the starchy foods, the unrefined starchy food have gone down, and the fat has gone up, and with that you see a dramatic increase in the prevalence of diabetes in Japan. But also you noticed something happened to their weight. Have you ever seen large Japanese? Have you ever seen fat Japanese? Have you seen obese Japanese? Have you seen Japanese with a camera on their belly? Of course. This is sort of a classic description of a Japanese tourist. You always see them take pictures of everything that they see when they come to America. Well, today, Japan is, again, more more than ever becoming also struggling with obesity. You see the overweight here? Let's see. See the overweight? This is the diabetes here, the yellow line, and at the same time you see overweight, obesity. They're going parallel. Again, it makes a point that overweight and diabetes are very closely related. They're cousins. And if you have to worry about diabetes, in 95% of the cases, you have to be concerned about your weight, overweight. Very, very few diabetics are underweight. 95% of the diabetics are carrying excess weight. And so here, you see the first shift from whole to refined foods. We talked about that before, that about 50% of our diet today in America are empty calories, no nutritional value. And then we talked about the food refinement from potatoes to potato chips. We talked about the second shift, dietary shift, from plant foods to animal products, where we had gone from about 124 pounds now to almost 200 pounds. And they've just come down the last 5 years. They used to be over 203. Now we're down to 193. So something is beginning finally to kick in. And then the third shift, again, you remember this graph here. This is a developing country here, where most of the calories come from unrefined starch. But as they become more affluent, something happens, and they adopt basically a diet that is like the American diet, where the fat content has dramatically increased, tripled, where the sugar consumption has increased, tripled, where the animal protein particular has doubled, and where the starch has dramatically been reduced. And whatever starch you eat now, it is refined white flour, cakes and pies and pizzas. Yeah. So this is the American diet again. We just to review, only about 6% of the foods that we eat, 6% of the calories that we eat are unrefined whole plant foods. There you see it down here, the green one. Everything else, either refined or animal products. Whenever you have this kind of a diet, you always have to worry about diabetes. Let me take you to the Adventist health study. The Adventist population has been heavily studied because of their unique longevity patterns around the world. And this is now the Adventist health study here in Loma Linda, which looked at the change in or the rates of chronic diseases. And I just want to focus on what we have seen in terms of diabetes. As you know, Adventists in North America, only about 9% of the people are actually pure vegetarians. 50% of the Adventists are actually meat-consuming Adventist people. The church recommends to move towards a plant-based diet, but you know, we are all human beings, and marketing efforts, Adventists are not immune to those marketing efforts either, and they follow the American culture. And so about 50% of the Adventists are using animal products, maybe not as many as the general population, but even so. So now the government is very interested. The government has given $25 million to Loma Linda University over the last few years to study the Adventists. What is it about the Adventists? And they said, well, the Adventists have a unique pattern. They kind of exercise somewhat. They go to church fairly regularly. They have a good social network. They're supportive for one another. They're kind of nice people, but they have different dietary patterns. And this became then a very ideal study population, because 50% of the Adventists are meat eaters. About 31% of these people are lacto-vegetarians, and then only 1.6%, only a very small portion, 9% of these people are total vegetarians. So who has the most diabetes? That's what the government wanted to know. Do the Adventists all have low diabetes? No. The Adventists that are carnivores, they have 4 times more diabetes than the people on the other end here, which are in the whole vegan kind of a diet. So just take a look. I can give you a pretty good prescription of how to become a diabetic. It's very easy. 5 years, 10 years, you go from normal to diabetic. And then you say, well, but I don't really want to become a diabetic because there's so many catastrophic issues that develop in time, right? You say, well, you know, maybe you don't want to really develop kidney disease, so, you know, maybe you just settle for just cut off one of my toes as a diabetic. So I'll go to this kind of a dietary pattern here, or to here. So you can actually choose the disease state that you want to be in so many years, depending on the kind of diet that you eat. This is what we're learning from the large Adventist study, where they followed some 100,000 people in North America for 7 years. And the people who were the meat eaters had 4 times more diabetes than the Adventists that were in the green category. You want to do something about diabetes? Go green. Go green, right? Well, what's really amazing to me is that we have known about diabetes and the causes for more than 100 years almost now. Dr. Sweeney created diabetics within 2 weeks in medical students. Here's what he did. He put these medical students on 2 different kind of diets. The first diet that he gave them was a very high-fat diet. He gave them hash browns, and salami, and cheese, and cream, and ice cream, and margarine, and butter, but no starches. And then he put them on a second diet, lots of starches, lots of sugar, lots of starch, lots of white bread, baked potatoes, candy, pastry, bananas. And then he followed these students for 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Guess who had the best results? The students that were on the high-fat diet. Right? Right? No. Who had the best results? Those who were on the high-starch diet. They were eating pastry. They were eating white bread. They were eating flour. It was really a shock to us. And we began to realize that there was something about diets that are very high in fat that apparently gum up the locks of the cells so that the insulin cannot do its work. Then in 1935, another famous man in England, he did some special experiments where he gave the patients a high-fat diet. The more fat in the diet, the more diabetes the people developed. San Luis Valley in Colorado, here again, they took 134 pre-diabetics and they followed them for 3 years. So these people already have some beginnings of diabetes, right? They followed them and they said, who of these 134 pre-diabetics becomes full-blown diabetic faster than anybody else? And they found out that those people who had the most fat in their diet had the most progression of the pre-diabetes to full-blown diabetes. So again, fat becomes a factor here. And this is what we now understand. This is a cell here. And you have lots of fatty molecules inside the cell. And it interferes with the signaling within these insulin and the blood sugar molecules there. It's a complicated kind of a process, but it's a very now understood process that a high-fat diet blocks the insulin to do its work, and so insulin becomes now insulin resistant. Another study, the Harvard nurses study, they had 85,000 pre-diabetics. I mean, can you imagine a study with 85,000 pre-diabetics? First, you have to find them. You have to follow them. You followed them for 16 years. And after 16 years, they found that out of these 85,000 pre-diabetics, 3,300 had become full-blown diabetics. And they found that 91% of those who became full-blown diabetics was directly related to their lifestyle. And the number one factor that drove them to become full-blown diabetics was overweight. And what is the number one factor that caused overweight? High fats. Because every gram of fat has how many calories? 9. Starch has how many calories per gram? 4. So whenever you have a fatty diet, it promotes overweight, excess weight. Then, boy, I need to tell you this story. You've heard of metformin? That's the most popular drug used as the initial drug in treating diabetes. Usually they give you 500 milligrams, and after a while they give you 1,000 milligrams, and sometimes even more than that. So they did the study here where they had 3 groups. So this was done in 27 scientific centers in the United States. They all had certain standards that they had to follow, procedures. And out of these 3,235 obese pre-diabetics that they followed for 3 years, they followed those people, one group, they didn't do anything. Said, do whatever you do, you're in the control group, we want to just see what happens to you. And so they did, and 29% of these people who didn't make any changes in their diet, they didn't take any metformin, they just lived their lives, 29% within 3 years became full-blown diabetics. Remember I told you earlier, 30% of pre-diabetics turn into full-blown diabetics within 3 years, if they're overweight? Okay, that's where this data comes from. So the control group, about 30% of these people became full-blown diabetics within 3 years. Then they had a second group, they were put on metformin. This is the most often prescribed initial drug for taking care of diabetics. And they found that people that were taking metformin drugs, only 21% became full-blown diabetics. Aha! It works, doesn't it? Yeah, it reduced from about 30% down to 20%. So metformin is helpful. But then they had a third group, and they said, we want you to do something totally different. We want you to be on a lifestyle program. We want you to exercise 150 minutes a week. How much is it per day? 20, 30 minutes a day, right? It's not a big program, right? It's 30 minutes. It's a mild program. I mean, when we talk about lifestyle medicine, we are really talking about making major changes to turn the disease around. This was a very mild program. They wanted them to lose 7% of their weight over a period of 3 years. I mean, you're losing that weight in a few weeks here, right, in our program, right? How many have lost weight in the last 2 or 3 weeks? Yeah, look at this. Are you starving? Have you stopped eating? What did you stop eating? What did you stop eating? Okay. So this is a lifestyle. This is a very mild intervention group. 14% of these people become full-blown diabetics. Please note, only 14% become full-blown diabetics in contrast to metformin, 21%, and control group, 29%. Which is the most successful group? If they would have used a more radical approach in lifestyle changes, like what we're doing here, just like this. So, here's another study, another Harvard study. 200,000 physicians are followed for 10 years, and they found that those who were eating for every 2 ounces of processed red meat a day, the diabetes in these people increased by 50%. Just how much is 2 ounces of meat? How much is that? I mean, just a few bites, right? 2 ounces of processed red meat increased diabetes by 50%. Oh, do we have some sound here?
Hi, I'm Dr. John McDougall, and what people want me to talk about more and more these days is diabetes. People are talking a lot about diabetes. They ought to be. I mean, somewhere around 10% of the population in the United States is diabetic. And the kind of diabetes we're talking about is type 2 diabetes. Used to be called adult type diabetes, but we just call it type 2 now. And by definition, this kind of diabetes is due to the rich Western diet and becoming fat. So you would think if that's what type 2 diabetes is, it's a consequence of eating the rich Western diet and becoming fat, that you ought to be able to cure it by correcting the problem. And you can, by definition. And I want you to know I sincerely mean this. By definition, type 2 diabetics are always curable by fixing the problem, which is the Western diet. Get rid of it. Substitute it for a starch-based diet with the addition of fruits and vegetables. Lose the associated excess weight, the obesity, and you will be cured. That's what the truth is, and that's what the science says. And my more than 35 years of experience as a medical doctor shows that to be true. Why not? Think about it. The definition, type 2 diabetes, a dietary disease by definition. Why couldn't you fix it? You can. You lose the weight, you eat a healthy diet, and it goes away, and you get off the pills. And that's, of course, what you want. But people aren't hearing that. What they're hearing is you need to take one pill after another pill, and then you have to go on insulin shots. And these pills make you sick. As a matter of fact, they make you even fatter, and your diabetes gets worse, and you feel lost. And the problem is continuing. They expect within the next 30 years that 30% of the population in Western countries will suffer from type 2 diabetes. You don't have to be one of them. I'm Dr. John McDougall.
So here is again what we talked about, that 50 to 75% of type 2 diabetics on insulin and 80 to 90% on pills could normalize their blood sugars within weeks and be off medications if they change their diet. So here's a fourth shift from high to low in fiber. That's very, very important. Please note that currently we only take in about 10 to 12 grams of fiber in our diet. We probably should have more than 40 or 50 grams. In China, it's more like 60 or 70 grams. When the milling industry in the 1880s began to turn whole wheat kernels into white flour to extend its shelf life, they didn't only lose many of the nutrients, such as vitamins and minerals, but they also lost 90% of the dietary fiber. Could the difference of disease rates between England and native Africans possibly be explained by the difference in diet? And then it hit him one day when, of all things, he noticed African stools. African stools. These stools look different. They did not look like the British stools he remembered. These African stools actually were large and soft and moist, and indeed the very opposite of many British stools. And so he devised an experiment with his African patients. He gave them deep red-colored berries to eat and told them, they will color your stools red. When you see red stools, be sure you come back at once to the clinic and let me know. Well, he expected these people to come back in 3 to 5 days because that was the common transit time for many English and American people. How shocked he was to see his patients jubilantly coming back within 24 hours and said, Dr. Burkett, we found it. You know, as funny as it is, it ultimately led to the discovery of the role of the missing ingredient, dietary fiber, in its many different forms. Now we know that insoluble fiber, as found in grains, will provide greater satiety and a sense of fullness, which is so important in the management of overweight. You see, now you can eat more of these high fiber, low calorie foods and weigh less. Think of it. That's nothing new. You already knew that, didn't you? We talked about that when we talked about overweight. This is a story of Dr. Dennis Burkett, a famous physician who became a medical missionary, left the British Isles as a famous surgeon there, came to Africa for the next 20, 30 years, and he could no longer find the diseases that he was supposed to be operating on. He couldn't find gallstones anymore. He couldn't find kidney disease anymore. He couldn't find heart disease anymore. But he discovered different stools. And, I mean, he became known as an eccentric that would go around with his camera in Africa and take pictures of stools. And then he would come to medical conventions in America and would show these pictures on the screen. And you know, these people, and his wife was totally embarrassed. She was a very elegant lady. And I know them very well because I used to work with him. And she was very, very embarrassed when her husband showed these. No, they didn't have any aroma accompaniments there. But I tell you, that was the beginning of learning something about something called dietary fiber. We had no idea something was called dietary fiber. It was developed in the 1970s. We had no understanding. This is how we discovered the importance of having diets that are high in fiber, which had been unknown until the 1970s and 80s. And today, they've become big news. So where do you find fiber? Take a look. Meats, chicken, cheese, sausage, donuts, chips, ice cream, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Then you have the optimal diet: rolled oats, groats, pears, and apples, and Ezekiel bread, whole wheat pasta, beans and peas, avocados, lots of fiber. That's what you want to do. By the way, we have a surprise for you. Next Sunday, all of you that are enrolled in the program, you have another Ezekiel 4-9 bread being donated by the bakery in Corona. We're going on Friday to pick them up. 140 some loaves of bread. Is that nice? Yeah. So here again, please take a look at this. We have talked about it once before, but you see, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, they're all very low in fat and they're all very high in fiber. That's the beauty. These foods that we recommend, fruits, vegetables, whole grain, legumes, all low in fat but high in fiber. Look at the legumes here. Look at the beans. But then look at animal products, high in fat, 0 fiber. Refined processed foods, relatively high in fat, minimal in fiber. So you know what the concept is, right? Eat more foods that are high in fiber and low in fat. And here again, I really want to make sure that you get this point. We have carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are either simple carbohydrates, these are the sugars, or they're complex carbohydrates, they're starches. So you have these two different kinds of carbohydrates, but please note, simple carbohydrates, when they're refined, they're getting you into trouble. If you have sugars that are part of whole foods, it's not a big issue. You can have your berries, you can have your raspberries, you can have your strawberries, you can have your apples, you can have your mangoes, even as a diabetic, because they're not refined. And you restrict them to 2 or 3 a day, not in the form of juice, but you eat them as they come to you, right? On the other hand, you have your also complex starches, and when they're refined, what are refined starches? Well, it's white flour, right? White flour products, cakes, pies, cookies, refined in red. But on the other hand, you can have starches that are whole foods as grown. These are the good carbohydrates. These are the bad carbohydrates. These are the bad carbohydrates, the refined simple sugars. These are the refined complex starches, the bad carbs. You want to eat whole foods as grown. It seems to be amazing that somehow there was a creative designer that knew exactly how to package the food. Don't let the industrialists get a hold of it, because they usually ruin it. So, I want to spend a few minutes now on, can you really reverse diabetes? And again, I take you back all the way to 1933. They did an experiment there, 1933, up in Canada, 5-year controlled experiment. They used 100 diabetics on insulin, and then they put them on a very low-fat diet, which then meant about 20% fat instead of 45% fat. This was a low-fat diet. They reduced the fat in the diet, and 24 out of these 100 insulin-using diabetics were off insulin within weeks. That was the first sign that if you change the fat, you can change the diabetes. Then you had Dr. Singh, 1955, and I'll just give you a few highlights. There are lots and lots of studies that have been done. I'll just give you 3 or 4 here. Dr. Singh took 80 patients on insulin, and he put them on a very, very low-fat, whole food program. That's what we're doing here. I mean, if you're really applying it, I mean, maybe you're not on 11%, but maybe you've come down to 20% or so, which is good. We really applaud you for this. This is now a therapeutic diet, very low in fat, 11% fat, whole foods diet. And please note, 80 patients on insulin. After 6 weeks, 50 out of 80 patients are no longer diabetics. Diabetes is gone. No more insulin. 18 more were off insulin in 18 weeks, which means 85% of these diabetics that were on insulin at the end of 18 weeks no longer diabetics. As long as they follow their diet, they're no longer diabetics. Do you hear what I'm saying? I mean, people say you cannot reverse diabetes. Yes, you can. You can stop it. You can arrest it. And as long as you follow a very simple diet, it will not come back to you. Then here's the Pritikin program, where I spent some time. 1983, we had 874 diabetic patients. Please note, 44% of these diabetic patients were able to stop the insulin within 4 weeks, less than 4 weeks. Yeah, take a look at this. Take a picture of it. 44%, almost half of the insulin-using diabetics in less than 4 weeks were off the insulin, and they had normal blood sugars. Then you have patients, 74% of the patients on medication, pills, were left the center drug-free within less than 4 weeks. I mean, this is what Dr. Anderson, Professor Anderson from Kentucky saw for himself. And he didn't want to believe it. It cannot be. These people are on a high-starch diet. You're killing them. No. Look at this. 74% are no longer diabetics in less than 4 weeks on a high-starch diet. Here's Dr. Anderson. He did the experiment. He had 28 patients at the University of Kentucky. He wanted to try it out for himself. And you can see 79% of the patients were off the medications. They were no longer diabetics in just how many weeks? Let's see, what does it say? Hello? Was it a sign? Okay, we better close. Here's Dr. Neil Barnard. He wrote the book Reversing Diabetes Without Drugs. Very highly regarded professor. He showed that 71% of the diabetic patients could stop their oral medication, their pills, in a 26-day program where they followed a very simple program of foods as good. Here's the CHIP program. And here you see 525 diabetics we had, and within 30 days, out of the 525 diabetics, we only had 301 diabetics within 30 days. What happened to those 224 diabetics? What happened to them? What happened to them? I talked to a medical group of physicians, and I said, what do you think happened to those 224? They must have died. No. They lived. So, when it comes to the right diet for diabetes, you want to be on a low-fat diet, no cholesterol, no animal products, moderate protein, no animal protein, lots of fiber, plenty of legumes, lots of nutrition value, low calories, and you can eat as much as you want until you're full because the fiber fills you up. You don't have to worry about calories. That's beautiful. So here's the recipe then for type 2 diabetes. It's a whole food, plant-strong diet. It offers the single most powerful and effective remedy to prevent, reverse, and heal type 2 diabetes. Are you ready for this now? Listen to this.
Hello, I'm Dr. Roger Greenlaw, and I would like to share with you a story from my practice. We'll be hearing about the health benefits of a high-fiber diet in a 76-year-old woman with multiple lifestyle-related diseases.
It had started several years ago, maybe 25, 30 years ago. I began gaining weight. That's the first thing I noticed. And with that weight gain, I developed some high blood pressure. And soon the doctors were talking to me about high cholesterol. And not too long after that, I started to develop what I thought were cardiovascular symptoms. I was very, very tired. I couldn't walk very much of a distance before I had to sit down. I would be out of breath. Very soon after that, I developed symptoms of diabetes. After several years of that, I started to have even more complications that come with high blood pressure and diabetes. I started to have eye problems, what they call diabetic retinopathy. So I did go to a nephrologist, and he suggested that my kidney function tests indicated that I was going into kidney failure. In fact, I was at stage 4. Which sort of puts you right at the edge of needing dialysis and or a kidney transplant. Finally, one Sunday, I lost vision in my right eye, and at the same time had a problem with my right arm. There was some pain there, and I couldn't use it very easily. So then they ran more serious tests and finally did an angiogram. And at that time, they found many, 7 or 8 blood vessels that needed to be replaced. And then went out to tell my husband and daughter they would have to do open heart surgery and take veins from my leg and replace those blocked blood vessels in my heart. And they did that in short order. In addition to what I saw as very serious health problems, I did start to develop some digestive problems along the way. And I took some over-the-counter type medications for that, and it didn't seem to help much. So by the time that I made an appointment to see Dr. Greenlaw and talk about the colonoscopy, I also had many other digestive problems to discuss.
Now I would like to tell you about the medications that Beverly was taking. She was on 4 different medications for high blood pressure. One of them causes potassium to be lost from the body, so she was also taking a potassium supplement. In addition, she was on a trial of Lipitor for cholesterol elevation. Let's focus for a moment on Beverly's diabetes. She was insulin dependent, not only taking long-acting insulin every day, but several times during the day, she required injections of regular insulin to control her blood sugars. And remember, she had complications of her diabetes.
I had so many things that I really didn't know what to work on next to try to keep under control. I was so worried about myself and how I was feeling and what I was going to do if this thing progressed, or if I couldn't get those kidneys under control, or if the veins that they had replaced the arteries with in my heart blocked again. So I really was in a hopeless situation, and I knew I had to make some firm decisions and life changes.
In our discussions, it was obvious to Beverly, and it was obvious to me, that she had exhausted all the traditional medical interventions that could help with her diseases and complications. She was asking me, what could I do that would improve my situation? Now, we talked about lifestyle change, her nutrition, her exercise, what stresses were going on in her life. And could she make some changes that might begin to address her diseases? And she was interested. I recommended that she try the CHIP program, and she agreed. As Beverly and I talked about lifestyle change, therapeutic lifestyle change, we talked about her multiple diseases and how the CHIP program could address all of those. The idea that if you treat one problem with a lifestyle change, you begin to treat all problems simultaneously that are lifestyle related. And that seemed like a perfect idea for Beverly's situation. Now for the really fun part of this story. Beverly signed up to take the CHIP program in September and October of 2009, and I would like to share with you some of her laboratory data. In the beginning, her cholesterol was 263, and after the CHIP program, it was down to 170. When we looked out 5 months later, it was 202, and a year after that, 178. It is not unusual for people's numbers to improve with some ups and downs over time, and she has continued to improve. Notice her weight loss at the end of the CHIP program was 15 pounds, 5 months later, 25 pounds, and then in February, a year later, 40 pounds off, and in June of 2012, 57 pounds off, and that's where she leveled out. Notice the dress size going from 18 to 16 to 14 and then 12, and now she's shopping in the size 8 to 10 rack.
Then I noticed that I could eat a great deal without taking more insulin. The other thing I noticed is I seem to be losing weight, eating more, but losing weight. And that gave me some encouragement. I think probably just in the first weeks, I lost 10 pounds or more. As I became more involved with the program, I noticed that I could get the blood sugar levels under control. That was a big thing for me. And I was feeling a lot better.
The big story here is that she's off insulin and controlling her diabetes with metformin and lifestyle change alone. And let's not forget that Beverly was suffering from severe complications of her diabetes. With the taking of the CHIP program, the laser treatments stopped, and over the next 2 or 3 years, not one laser treatment was necessary. Her ophthalmologist was stunned at that result because that is so seldom seen in traditional medicine.
Then the neuropathy, that was a problem. In the auditorium where we had our CHIP program, there were steps, and every time we went to our seats or got up to get water or have a break, we would use those steps, and I needed help a lot of the times because I couldn't feel the steps. The steps themselves in my feet, with my feet. If I couldn't see them, I wouldn't know they were there. And so someone noticed and gave me some help when I needed to get up out of my seat. And now it's so different because even if I change socks and I have heavier socks on or lighter socks, I can feel the fibers in the socks, and it was something I couldn't feel before. Just recently, the doctor checked my feet with the little wire to see how your neuropathy is, if it's progressing, and he could find no evidence of it at all.
Neuropathy is something most people would say is not able to be improved by medical therapy. You would use pain medicine to control the discomfort, but you would not expect neuropathy to go away. And in Beverly's case, her neuropathy steadily improved till it is now no longer an issue in her life. Incidentally, her heartburn improved within 2 weeks of starting the CHIP program.
I would have been happy before I started CHIP if any of the diseases that I've talked about would have been helped, even to any degree. That's how desperate I was. And now I see that not only the diseases were, some of them reversed, all of them improved, that's for sure, but it changed me as a person. I see myself sort of as CEO and president and chairman of the board of all the decisions that are made for my body, and do everything I can to make the right decisions day by day.
Beverly was one of my 5,000 participants in our program in Rockford near Chicago, where Dr. Greenlaw was the medical chief of our CHIP program there. It was absolutely amazing how the town, the city began to change, how food supplies began to change in the stores, and how people began to talk about their health. They talked about cholesterol, they talked about uric acid, things they never talked about before. It became a revolution in that city of 170,000 people. And so this has been a great joy for me. And when we had a special lifestyle medicine conference here in Loma Linda at the university, I flew out Beverly to come to Loma Linda, and I said, I want you to come to the blue zone. And she was excited about this. You know, she said, I want to give a talk there. I want to tell them what happened to me. And when she appeared on the stage, she was dressed in blue. And I said, Beverly, you came in blue. She said, you said it was a blue zone. So a totally different person, going downhill, turning life around, great joy. Husband a happy trooper, and those of us that are working with these people, great satisfaction that comes to us. No longer being dependent, imprisoned by medications that with these kind of diseases don't really accomplish too much.
Thank you, Dr. Diehl. So we all have learned all the secrets, because it's there, see, it's there, the nature. The Lord has provided the nature to not just remember our body was created that actually every organ system can reverse itself, because the Lord made it at least 30 to 70% that can reverse itself. And then if only we would change our lifestyle. So thank you very much, Dr. Diehl. This is a very, very important concept that we have to instill in our mind over and over again, that we can overcome all the handicaps in our body. Pastor Mike, would you offer a prayer, please?
Let's pray. Lord God, we thank you for the blessings of good food, exercise, sunshine, and all the rest that you give to us, that you shower upon us. May we make best use of those to witness to your grace, your love, your goodness. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you for spending the time with us this afternoon. And remember, if you need those 3x5 cards for the questions,